You're watching LMCC, your community TV.
Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Kay Erickson with the League of Women Voters of South Tonka, and today we're talking about teens and mental health. It's another in our series of programs exploring issues facing youth in our West Suburban area. Our aim in these programs is to educate the public about these issues and to provide a list of resources for those looking for more information or services. With me today is Peg DuBord, who's president of the South Tonka League of Women Voters. In our first meeting, Peg and I talked with Josh Ganados, an area director at Treehouse located in Minnetonka. It's an organization that helps teens build healthy relationships. In today's program, we're talking with Sandy Mangle, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as a clinical supervisor at Relate Counseling Center in Minnetonka. In the first part of our program, we're going to look at the issues teens are dealing with and why it's sometimes so hard to talk about mental health issues. And in the second segment, among other things, we'll talk about mental health statistics and the difficult topic of suicide, risk factors, warning signs, and trying to understand suicidal thinking. So welcome, Peg, and welcome, Sandy. Thank you for being here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Relate Counseling Center and how it started? You know, kind of what your service model is. I know that's a lot of things all in one, but
Sure.
You know, to get us started.
Absolutely. As a therapist at Relate Counseling Center, I work with clients of all ages, but most of my work is with teens and parents. And I'm a big believer that healthy relationships are really the foundation of wellness in all of our lives. And I just feel really fortunate to be in the role of helping people in that way. Another area that I've been very focused and committed to are suicide prevention efforts. So especially in this last year, I've been bringing suicide prevention education into those schools that Relate is partnered with in the West Metro area, and just really providing guidance and support as to how to best work with kids that are in crisis, kids that are experiencing mental health issues, and then ultimately kids that are struggling with suicidal ideation.
Well, that's a really great bit about yourself and Relate. You know, our mission here is to sort of figure out what kinds of things happen in our suburban areas. And so do you see any difference between, you know, what happens in the urban areas and the suburban areas relative to, you know, youth and services to them?
Well, first I'd like to begin by saying that Relate Counseling had a very humble start almost 50 years ago. And we began in a church basement in Minnetonka when a group of parents and clergy and teachers and just really concerned citizens in the community decided that they wanted to provide a safe space for teens to come together and really talk about those issues and those concerns that they were having. And after some time, they realized that these informal meetings really provided a space where kids could open up about their mental health issues, their family struggles. And fast forward to now, almost 50 years later, Relate Counseling is still in Minnetonka, but we are no longer in a church basement, and we are a licensed nonprofit community mental health center that provides mental health services and chemical health services to clients of all ages. So children, teens, adults, couples, and families. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is Relate's commitment to providing co-located services. We have Relate therapists in 40 different schools in our West Metro area, and as of this fall, we'll be in 8 different school districts. So that means that we have therapists in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools that are providing therapy, mental health services to kids, some of them that would not have an opportunity to receive therapy just due to barriers in their life.
Sandy, do you see any differences between the issues that kids in urban areas face relative to the kids in suburban spaces?
You know, I think that kids in urban spaces versus kids in the suburbs have the same struggles. They all struggle with depression, anxiety, relationship struggles. I think there's special challenges sometimes for kids that live in the suburbs that kids in urban areas may not experience. There have been some studies that recently have come out that have really reflected that kids in higher socioeconomic areas tend to be some of the most stressed kids because they're really faced with expectations and their own personal goals that sometimes can be perfectionistic in nature. And with that in mind, and knowing that parents can often share those same perfectionistic goals, there tends to be internal messaging that sometimes comes up in terms of I'm not good enough or I'm not measuring up.
What are some of the most common areas of issues for kids do you see?
Well, I think that nowadays, again, in terms of seeing mental health issues just as adults are facing, kids are no strangers to depression, anxiety, mood disorders, relationship struggles. They have extra concerns and extra areas of challenges when it comes to bullying or social media. And just the impact that that can have on a child feeling left out or dealing with the responses of others being negative toward them.
What are some of the things that happen relative to, stigma and mental health? Is that a barrier for kids? Is it a barrier for parents? How do you see that rolling out in your areas of concern?
I think stigma absolutely plays a part, more so probably for parents. But for kids, for anyone, I think when a person is struggling with mental health issues, if they fear judgment or blame, that is going to prevent them from coming forward and sharing their problems and their concerns with someone. So knowing that that ends up being a barrier to their own help and their own services. Nowadays, what I have witnessed in terms of my work with teens and just being at Relate amongst teens and parents is that teens are really open for the most part about going to therapy and receiving therapy and telling their friends you should see a therapist. It's been helpful to me. I think it's a little more difficult for parents because there's a sense of personal responsibility when our child is struggling. And I think that is still something that we need to be working on. And I think it's important to know that parents can also receive their own support when their child is going through difficult times.
Yeah, that's of a concern for sure. I think that, one thing parents don't understand is that sometimes, the more severe and persistent mental illnesses start in the teenage years. So, whether it's bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or something that's, it kind of comes into play, when kids are getting into high school. And do you see that in your work, or do you help parents understand, this is more than just depression? This is,
I think that we're lucky because a lot of the parents we're working with are pretty spot on in seeing the struggles that their kids are having. But it really does take collaborative work with the parents and educating them as well as the kids about what the road ahead looks like in terms of healing and finding tools and strategies to help their children, deal with life on a day-to-day basis in an easier way.
Right. Thank you. I think there's one thing that, you could talk about a little bit about, some of the therapies that are really non-intrusive, like EMDR, that I know that you practice in your approach with children. And, it's something that maybe people don't understand, that it's something more than talk therapy.
Sure. And I think you're right that we are tending to be thinking about talk therapy, right, when we're at Relate counseling, which all of us do as therapists. But there are other modalities that can be really helpful. It's really about changing the belief system, which we can, of course, do through talk therapy. But EMDR is a special kind of therapy that was created a few decades ago by a psychologist in California that discovered that bilateral movements back and forth of the eyes actually decreased intense and intrusive and distressful thoughts. And so EMDR is a therapy that we use with really kids and adults of all ages, but it's really especially helpful for people that may have a harder time talking about their issues and concerns, and it's really sitting back and allowing the process of EMDR to do the work so that they can develop healthier beliefs and reprocess old traumas, old belief systems, and find more adaptable, healthy beliefs to kind of allow them to carry on in life in a better, more positive way.
It's got to be fascinating to watch in action.
It is fascinating to watch, and I tell people over and over, it never gets tiring. It's amazing every time I get to witness it.
That's wonderful. Getting back to stigma and mental health issues in the general public, are there words that are used in general conversation that we as friends or concerned people, if we have somebody in our lives who we're concerned about, that we can language that perpetuates the stigma in news stories, in how we just talk generally. Can you talk about some of those phrases that are used around mental health?
Yes, I think what you're speaking to really is us being careful about the language we use so that it does reflect respect for the person. The first thing that comes to mind is not calling a person by their diagnosis. So we don't want to connect a person's identity with their diagnosis. So for instance, saying a person with schizophrenia versus referring to them as a schizophrenic. So being able to show that kindness and empathy. When we're talking about suicide, the language we use when we're referring to someone who has died from suicide, we want to say those words, the person died from suicide, or it was a death from suicide, or completed suicide. We want to stay away from using the phrase committed suicide, because that has kind of a criminal connotation to it in terms of the commitment word.
And I think about words we use in everyday language, things like, what crazy weather we're having, or that's, those kinds of things. Is that kind of what you're also concerned about?
I think so too. We have to be careful about using stereotype names such as, that person's crazy, or that person's insane, that person's nuts, whatever it may be, yeah.
I think that's really important. I think, in my work as well, we always talk about a person with a disability, or a person, with autism, rather than that person's autistic. And so it's just a conscious, deliberate rethinking about how we say things so that we really honor that person as an individual.
Absolutely.
Are there any other factors that make mental health issues hard to talk about?
The one thing I thought about when I'm thinking about that question, or the one thing I'm thinking about as I think of that question is that could play a role, and does play a role at times, are really cultural differences. People can think differently about death and suicide, and that also impacts how a person might reach out for professional help or not reach out for professional help. I think even about our own family climates. Each individual family has a tendency to be more comfortable talking about emotions or not talking about emotions. And so I think those things all play a role in a person being able to come forward and share their struggles with others.
So what you're saying is that the family that doesn't really talk about their emotions, it might be more challenging for that individual to reach out.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
It's really funny. In my daughter's family, she goes, I do the talking, my husband doesn't.
As long as someone's talking,
Right,
I think that's the important thing.
It's time for a short break. Talking Points will return in just a moment.
Check out LMCC on Facebook. Be sure to like and friend us so you can keep up with all the happenings or to watch one of your favorite videos.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Kay Erickson with the League of Women Voters of South Tonka. In this segment of the program, Peg DuBord, president of the South Tonka League, and I will continue our conversation with Sandy Mangle from Relate Counseling Center in Minnetonka. So Sandy, let's start this segment with some statistics about how mental health issues affect teens and how they affect their families, how that issue, dealing with the mental health issue, impacts their lives.
Well, I think the statistics are alarming when we know that suicide is the third leading cause of death among youth ages 10 to 24. And 90% of those teens and youth that take their own life have a mental health condition that they're dealing with. And I think this really speaks to a teen's diminished ability to cope and their impaired judgment at that time. 20% of youth live with a mental health condition, 11% of youth have a mood disorder, and 10% of youth have a conduct disorder. So those numbers are, again, very concerning, and it really speaks to the importance of kids getting the help they need and reaching out.
What are some of the risk factors for youth suicide?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is previous suicide attempt. When we know that a teen has attempted to take their own life before, our radar goes up because we know they've been in that dark place before and they see suicide as an option. Any kind of mental health issue, when we know that a teen is struggling with anxiety or depression or a mood disorder, their judgment's impaired. And I think it's important to know that not all depressed people have suicidal thinking. There are many teens and adults out there that are depressed and they never have had a suicidal thought. So just to take note of that. We're also looking at personal characteristics. So kids that tend to have lower self-esteem, feeling that they're lonely, feelings of isolation. I also would put high achievers on this list as personal characteristics because, again, we're speaking to the teen's internal messaging of, I'm not good enough. Someone else is doing it better. Often people are surprised when they hear about the star athlete or the star student that's taken their own life because they seem to have it all. But inside their own heads, that's not what they're telling themselves. Some other factors for suicide, risk factors, would be those things that kids are dealing with in everyday life, breakups, problems with friends, problems with family members, bullying, using drugs and alcohol, family problems, and just really discrimination. Kids that are struggling with their identity, whether it's gender identity, sexual identity, race discrimination, and again, they all connect and link up to that internal messaging of, I'm not good enough, no one likes me.
So as friends, as parents, as peers for anybody dealing with mental, we think might be struggling, what are some of the warning signs that we can look for?
Well, I think it's important to first identify 3 warning signs that would need immediate response. The first one would be if someone is talking about killing themselves or harming themselves. Number 2, if you know of a teen that's looking for ways to end their life, are they looking for access to weapons, access to medications, access to a means? And then really letting others know that they're thinking about ending their life. A lot of times, what we know when we're working with teens that relate is they tell a friend or they post something on social media, which actually ends up being a positive thing because then we can get that kid help and we can reach out and connect. And some of the warning signs that we need to be looking for over time in a teen's life would be depression, hopelessness. I think one of the biggest things ends up being withdrawal. When we notice that a teen is withdrawing from their friends, their family, their usual activities and interests, that's a big warning sign. Some of the others, loss of appetite, just having a general low sense of self, low self-esteem. I think most important to think about are really just changes that you see in the teen's behavior, mood changes. The one thing that has always stood out to me when I've worked with depressed teens and sometimes suicidal teens is there seems to be almost an apathy or a low energy that they exude. And I think that connects to not caring about things anymore. So just being on the lookout for those things is important.
So if a student says to their friend, I want to kill myself, I don't see any reason to live any longer, what should that student do?
That student should go to a trusted adult. So whether it is a parent, if it happens during the school day, it could be the school social worker, the school counselor, but absolutely tell someone so that we can reach out to that person and connect them to help. Always say something, and that's what's hard. And I think especially when you're talking about peers, they're in that position a lot where they're aware of a friend that's struggling and has been expressing that they're thinking about suicide. The best thing that that teen can do, or even a parent of a teen can do, is say something, let them know they're not alone, let them know that they're here to help, and then connect them to the resources.
Even if that person who's struggling says, please don't tell anyone.
That is so important, yes. My answer would be tell anyway. And what I talk a lot about with teens, what we all talk about as therapists with teens, is better to have a friend mad at you than not have a friend here at all, by not saying something.
Now, you talked about sometimes the most successful looking teen might be the one who's really struggling and thinking about taking their own life. So how do we go about understanding suicidal thinking? Because it seems counter to what we're seeing.
Well, I think that suicidal thinking is really speaking to what's going on internally, right, in someone's mind. So knowing first that when a person's thinking of suicide, we know they're not able to really access their rational, logical thinking. Their judgment is impaired. I mean, if a person is considering suicide as an option, we know that they're not thinking clearly. And to know that a person who's suicidal can't think past the point they're in. They're not able to connect to the future. They're not able to connect to the idea that things will get better. You won't always feel this way. There's help. There's people in your life that will care about you and do care about you. And I think too, suicidal thinking can be a form of communication for some teens, that it's not really so much about wanting to die, but it's really more about struggling to live. And if we can understand that teens are in a place where I really believe most of the time they don't want to end their life, but they are so deep in despair and deep in pain. And any way we can reach out, any way we can extend kindness and empathy and understanding is really the solution.
The struggle to live, that is such a perfect analogy. I mean, I just think that kids don't, they don't talk about it. It's all in their internal talking to themselves about, what's going on in their life, and that whole struggle, to live is really a very great way to sort of help understand what's going on.
I believe that to be true, and I think teens have taught me that through my work with them.
So if someone we know is thinking about suicide, what are the specific things we can say? Because it's one thing to say, have some empathy and understanding, but what specifically are some ideas for what we can actually say?
Or not say.
Or not say, exactly.
Well, I think the important thing, and I would answer this in two parts. Number one, if someone is really struggling and suicidal, we need to find out first and foremost, are they having thoughts of killing themselves? And asking that direct question. And that's a hard question to ask. And it's even hard for therapists to ask. But it's so necessary. And we will not plant the idea. I think there's always some apprehension that, well, if we bring it up, that may plant the idea in their head. And that's not true at all. The best thing we can do is ask that direct question. Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? If they answer yes, then the next question is, do you have a plan? Because that tells us how far along in the process they are. And if they have a plan, then we need to get them to the nearest ER for assessment immediately. If they don't have a plan and they're just struggling, and they're safe and they're able to commit to safety, then it's about how do we connect them to finding the right resource. What mental health professional can we make an appointment with for some continued care, for some future care, and actually just for assessment, to kind of know where they're at and what level of care is needed. In terms of what else can we say to them, my thought is it's really about extending kindness and empathy and understanding to kids so that they are likely to reach out to us and they are likely to share their problems and their concerns with us so that we're able to help them.
You feel safe. What are some of the precautions that families should take if they have a teen that, or a friend or whatever that is suicidal? What can they do to, provide a safe environment?
Well, you're really going to limit access to the means of someone taking their own life. And this is something we talk about with parents. If they know that their child is in danger and has been experiencing suicidal thinking, it's about making sure every weapon, every gun in the house is locked up if there are weapons in the house. It's about making sure that the child does not have access to pills. If there's an immediate concern, of course, then again, it's getting assessment as soon as possible.
Wow, it's a lot to think about. It's such a serious issue, but I think those are some really practical things that we could think about doing if we are concerned about somebody. I appreciate those specifics. This is a little bit different topic, but certainly in the news. Have the incidents of school shootings impacted teens in our area?
Yeah, I think school shootings actually impact all of us, right? Yeah. Not only the kids and the staff and the parents that are linked to the actual school shooting, but all of us that are watching it on the news or reading about it in the paper. I think it provokes fear and anxiety and insecurity, and raises a lot of questions and anxieties for kids and for parents. And again, it kind of points back to the importance of being able to talk out loud about those fears and anxieties, and is it going to be helpful for a child or a teen or a parent to have a conversation with a professional so that they can kind of work through those challenges if they're ending up being challenges.
Do you see that families really respond to kids being bullied? How do you see that happening? I know that bullying is something that happens with social media. It happens in school. It happens in different groups, and it really is important, I think, to talk about relative to what happens, what can we do, how can we help, things like that.
Well, and that is a great question, and I think that is a serious area to talk about and be proactive about. I have witnessed in my own experience when I did work in the schools as a therapist for a few years, and then even in my experience currently with teens and kids and families, that there is a very strong anti-bullying, no tolerance policy that's very apparent. They are working that type of information and support and resources into curriculum in the schools. It doesn't even have to be an assembly anymore. I think that's something that all teachers are talking about in their classroom, and I've seen a lot of support in schools for not allowing that to happen. And it's really about not keeping it secret, for kids to speak up, for parents to speak up. And I think parents have been really good advocates as well for their own children. If they feel that their child has been bullied, how do they reach out and let the school know? How do parents in the school and kids work together to put a stop to it?
So do parents know, like, if their child is being bullied, who they go to it in the school? What's like the first stop, that parents might make relative to that?
I think every school is different, but most schools, it would either be the principal. It's always a safe bet to talk to a school social worker. Some schools have behavior intervention people that deal in that area, but I think the school social worker or the school counselor would probably be the first person to begin with in a school.
This is another switch, but the League of Women Voters is active in changing policy around a variety of issues. Is there anything that our different levels of government can do that would help youth and their families with these issues, whether it's schools or cities or police or any of that?
My mind goes first to just the broader picture here. More funding, right, for community mental health resources. How do we make sure that anyone, regardless of age, regardless of where they live, has access to mental health counseling and resources? One thing that we talk a lot about in this field that really involves parent education too. More funding for parent education would be the link that it has to ACEs. And that stands for, ACES stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it is linked to a greater risk for kids to develop more serious mental health issues later in life and other concerns that have to do with previous early traumas or stressors. And parents have a huge role to play in building resilience in their children. So really educating parents on what they can do to be part of the healing process is huge. And then third, I would think about just getting the word out. How do we get the word out that talking to a professional makes a difference, and that you can learn tools and strategies to better overcome struggles and challenges and get through life in a better way, in an easier way.
25% of the population has a diagnosable mental health issue, and so that's like the person here. That's,
Right.
It's really prevalent. People don't understand just how prevalent it is, and so to sort of be able to understand that mental health is just part of being healthy.
Right.
And that we all have our struggles, and we all have to sort of reach out and sort of figure them out, and not to be afraid to do so. Hopefully abandoning the stigma of being able to reach out because we have a mental health issue.
Yes, yes, that's the hope.
Well, and trying to deal with some of these things early is going to save us a lot of pain later on, because these things aren't going to go away without some kind of intervention at times anyway.
I think that early intervention is really important. Early intervention is, and prevention is the way to go. So if you have somebody you can deal with at the onset rather than the crisis, I think that would be a way to make sure that we have a healthy population.
Exactly.
I agree, and I think you're really speaking to proactive prevention here, and I think it's the most important thing we can do, because it really speaks to the idea that, really the fact that suicide is preventable if a teen reaches out to us when they're in crisis. And so how do we make it more likely that that teen will reach out to us in crisis? And a lot of studies have shown, in my work with teens has taught me that teens are more likely to reach out to us when they feel that sense of connectedness in their environment, in families, in schools, in our greater community. And so how do we increase those chances of doing that?
Which maybe leads into the next question, is Relate is located in Minnetonka, and you're one of the resources people can go to for help.
Yes.
But there are other resources. Are there other resources you'd like to talk about?
I'm a big believer in teens having resources at their fingertips. If they are awake by themselves at 2 a.m. and they're not able to get a hold of anyone, what can they do in the moment if they're feeling in crisis or need to reach out to someone just for some support? And so as of April 2018 this year, we have the what's called the crisis text line, and it's 741-741, and teens can text that.
And you said that is specifically if someone from Minnesota texts, that information comes back about Minnesota resources. Is that correct?
They're linked to the support and resources they need here in Minnesota. It's a national text line, but it would be hooked up locally. And then, of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and then COPE, I think, another resource that's amazing in our community. There's a mobile crisis unit that can come out to the home and do an assessment. And so COPE is an organization that anyone can call that will, again, kind of assess the situation and point them in the right direction.
So, is there anything else you'd like people to know about this issue that we haven't covered, or that you'd like to reiterate or remind everybody about?
Yes, I think about just the fact of knowing that suicide is preventable if a teen reaches out. And so what can all of us do to promote, again, that connectedness, that understanding, that empathy, so that we're able to help a teen and point them in the right direction when they reach out, and ultimately that will save lives.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peg, and thank you, Sandy, for being here today. You've really brought some important issues to our attention. If you're interested in finding out more about Relate Counseling, you can go to their website, relatemn.org. For other groups and agencies helping youth in our area, we have a resource list that's on the screen. It's not meant to be a comprehensive list, but it is a start. Programs like this are just part of League's mission. For 99 years, the League of Women Voters has been encouraging citizens to get informed, to get involved, and to vote. We hold public meetings on current issues and how government works. We put on candidates' meetings, register voters, and provide voting information. We also study issues, reach position, and lobby at the local, state, and national levels. However, we are nonpartisan. We never support or oppose political parties or candidates. Our South Tonka League is open to the membership of both men and women, 16 years of age and older, and covers the cities in our southwest suburban area. For more about our league, you can go to lwvsouthtonka.org. Finally, I'd like to thank the Lake Minnetonka Communications Commission for the opportunity to present this program, and to thank you for watching.